Sometimes research feels as though the people being studied are like animals or like, things in a laboratory. It doesn't feel human. It doesn't feel relational.
Now, a lot of organizations are coming to people like us because they realize that they need to canvass the opinions and the voice of the people with lived experience, people that are affected by. But they don't have access to those people. They call them hard to reach.
Yeah.
As if we live on Pluto or Mars. I walk down Brixton High Street, Lewisham High Street, Peckham, Catford, and we're just there.
Unfortunately, the researchers parachute into the community. They do the research, they write it up. There's a whole process, and it might be a year or 2 years later, but it's published. Things could have changed.
In this effort to legitimize community research as a thing, it already creates a hierarchy where there's community research and then there's the formal people, as if those of us who have formal academic qualifications don't come from those communities. It actually creates a rupture between us and our people in some weird way that I find very, very problematic.
I believe that academia is the least diverse profession in Britain. So, less diverse than the Lords, less diverse than, High Court judges. I don't think people realise that there are less black professors in this country than there are universities.
This is, for me, I guess, the reason why I won't leave the academy. Because what happens with, black scholars and scholars of color, is that there's very few places as violent as the academy. And its violence is quiet, but very, very painful.
I've heard from multiple people who have felt completely lied to and let down. They thought community research was going to come in and bring them something different to the more extractive models that had been critiqued of the way university researchers were. And then they were told, no, you're going to become community researchers. We're going to train you up. They give you a couple of days training. They're also told they're going to be given a qualification for that time. And I've heard people who've never got the qualification and who obviously are not employable as a researcher relative to someone who's gone through a formal process of getting a master's or a PhD, and it was a complete farce. And I think one of the things is that people are trying to make community research seem credible with training, and then trying to make it seem on a par. You can't really compare that with 4 or 5 years working in a PhD program or a master's. That's the thing we're not supposed to say, because then you're creating a hierarchy as a trained researcher with someone else. But it is also a bit of it's an untruth that creates disillusionment.
There's also the issue that those people collecting data are often on 0 hours contracts.
Yeah, which are highly exploitative. And problematic and pose real problems for community researchers.
So there are all of these kind of ethical dilemmas that arise, and I'm not sure that we do ethics really well in community research.
And it wouldn't surprise me if in the years ahead we see a load of critique of community research for exactly these kinds of dynamics.
Busy Brixton, busy Brixton.
I like to be embedded in the community. Where my office is in the heart of Brixton International House. We're right next to a police station. So the work that I'm doing now is really about safeguarding specifically young people, also communities around fraud, around financial violence, which is a real thing. There's young people being stabbed because of fraud, kidnapped because of fraud, children being what's called sextorted or sextortion. That's a form of fraud. It's fraud and extortion and sexual exploitation synergized into one. Back when I was doing this serious youth violence work, safeguarding young people from being harmed, I'll never forget, a lot of the young people that are being stabbed, they have to get a risk assessment done by the safeguarding officer in the hospital in order for them to be discharged into a safe environment, to ensure that the hospital understands the level of risk to this young person because they have duty of care. And what's interesting is a lot of the safeguarding officers, God bless them, because they're trying, speak a completely different language to the young people who were at risk. So they'll come in with their clipboard and their papers, and they'll have to ask a series of questions in order to ensure this young person is safe. But they cannot communicate with it. Both parties are speaking English, but they cannot communicate with that young person in order to make sure that they are safe and assess the level of risk. So I came in, I was requested to come in, I've been in a translator almost, to translate the safeguarding assessment tool in a language that the young person understood in order to assess their risk and keep them safe. So all three of us are speaking English, but yeah, I'm called in to ensure that what's being said is being understood. So language, which is the essence of communication, is crucial, because if we don't know what's being said, things go past us.
I think there's also something very important about getting the right people to do that work, because not everybody can go into these places or will be well received because of the history that exists within research. So it's not just about going to the spaces that we know exist, also finding the right people to ensure this work is culturally sensitive and trauma-informed.
We're having a conversation about the arts and creativity over here and what people really need and what their space is like. And then we're having a conversation about participatory action research and, you know, how we fund the stuff. And then there's academia. And at the bottom of this, or shouldn't say bottom, but it's how it feels, are the communities. Where do they get to say what it is we're addressing and to define the terms? The place I was instinctively going to go was the language thing as well, because I feel like even around this table, we are representative of us, some of us in communities and funders, etc. But there's also still this really different language being used by everyone around the table.
I used to be the chair of the Safer Neighbourhood Board in Lambeth. I was in City Hall twice a month. Sometimes the communication went right over my head because I didn't understand why I'd be in the same room as everybody, but I wouldn't understand the conversation. But I learned through my deputy chair and my program coordinator that there's something called white speak. And it reminded me of the young person in the hospital bed who I had to be the translator for. And I was like, what is going on here? But the dominant culture is European culture, white culture. And the language reflects the culture. I'm someone who, quote unquote, is in a position of responsibility, respect and advocacy, and I'm struggling. The average everyday person who needs to know this stuff, how would they?
One of the things that I value about community research is that there is a language for looking at issues of power within research that have too often been avoided. Who has had a right to do research? Who has had a right to be heard and speak? Who has had a right to influence policy? And if community research exists as the language with which we can ask those questions and make those claims, then I perceive that overall to be very positive.
Data for me just conjures up being summed up in some level of number or short descriptor that is then an easy package, but it reduces all of the, all of this stuff, the complexity, and that's a boring word as well, but, all the things that make us human and make up our human experience.
If we take the power away from those who have been using the numbers to tell the stories and bring it back to the people who those numbers are based on. Then numbers in and of themselves aren't the problem.
No, I appreciate what you're saying in the shift in power dynamic. It's who owns the numbers.
A lot of the research and the engagement that takes place, top down, it misses a lot of that. The humanism. And that's where community research, I think, spins it on its head. Because we're not going in, we're in. Another community champion there. One of the heroes of the community as well coming up. So he's the next up. The real community hero. The real community hero.
You guys all right?
The next up.
The man here, he helped me a lot. He was my mentor when I was younger,
I'm stepping down, he's the next one.
We're the change makers,
We have to care, hold true to what we have and champion us. And that's the power of community research.